Good evening, everybody. We at Nishith Desai Associates are delighted to be here, and we welcome all of you to this event on investing in net zero. You would have received the announcement of the event. I do want to introduce a few people who are going to be who are scheduled to speak today. One of our guest speakers today is Mr. Uday Khemka. Uday, welcome. Uday is the vice chairman of the Sun Group and managing trustee of the Nand and Jeet Foundation. Uday Khemka is the vice chairman of the Sun Group of companies. He has worked in the past at Credit Suisse Stanley in London and New York, and then he established and headed up Morgan Stanley's operations in India. Today, Uday leads the new energy activities of the group, which include renewable energy, sun storage, and electric mobility infrastructure. His passion for new energy led him to set up Sun New Energy Holdings, which today includes Sun Mobility, aiming to be a global leader in electric mobility energy infrastructure in a partnership with Chetan Meni, as well as Sun Renewables. He was also previously the co-chair of the Clean Energy Finance Forum, jointly established by Prime Minister Modi and President Obama to catalyze investment towards India's 175 gigawatts clean energy target for 2022. Among other climate philanthropic endeavors, Uday resourced the entry of the Climate Group into India and has been on its board ever since. Uday was educated at Eton College and Cambridge University and received an MBA with distinction from the Harvard Business School as a Baker Scholar. I will now like to introduce Nishith Desai.
Welcome, Jayant. So nice of you, and thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Jayant sir. This is great to have you with us. I was just about to begin introducing you. I've just introduced Uday Khemka, and I will now introduce you, sir. So, Mr. Jayant Sinha is the Member of Parliament and Chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance. Mr. Jayant Sinha is a Lok Sabha Member of Parliament representing the Bharatiya Janata Party from Hazaribagh in Jharkhand. He has over 25 years of experience as an investor and strategy consultant. He was the Union Minister of State for Finance in the Government of India. He won his Lok Sabha elections in 2014 and 2019 with record margins. As chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance since 2019, Mr. Sinha leads a 31-member parliamentary panel that has oversight on the ministries of finance, corporate affairs, statistics and program implementation, and the Niti Aayog, which is the government's planning agency. Mr. Sinha has assisted the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Finance Minister in driving landmark initiatives such as PM Jan Dhan Yojana, PM Jan Suraksha Yojana, PM Mudra Yojana, devising the Indradhanush package for public sector banks, passing of the insurance bill in Parliament, setting up the National Infrastructure and Investment Fund, launching the India Aspiration Fund to promote entrepreneurship and strengthening India's capital markets. Mr. Jayant Sinha's prior business experience includes 12 years with McKinsey and Company as a partner in the Boston and Delhi offices. At McKinsey, Mr. Sinha co-led the global software and IT services practice. Until 2013, he was a partner at Omidyar Network, an investment firm with over 850 million in invested capital, where he led the overall investment strategy and operations in India. He has also spent several years as a managing director at Courage Capital, a billion-dollar global special situations hedge fund. Mr. Sinha holds an MBA with distinction from the Harvard Business School and MS in Energy Management and Policy at the University of Pennsylvania, and a Bachelor of Technology degree with distinction from IIT Delhi. I would like to introduce Nishith Desai, founder and managing partner, Nishith Desai Associates. Nishith Desai is the founder of the research and strategy-driven international law firm, which is ranked amongst Asia Pacific's innovative law firms by the Financial Times. Nishith Bhai's interest spans a wide spectrum of law, society, and ethics. He's a renowned international lawyer, author, lecturer, researcher, and a thought leader. Nishith himself is regarded as the father of international tax in India and as a true pioneer in the field of international tax law. He was also a director on the board of the Singapore International Arbitration Center. Soon after India opened its economy to the outside world in 1991. Nishith pioneered the roots of asset management industry in India. He established the first 5 India-focused private equity funds. He played a seminal role in structuring several private equity funds, in addition to structuring several domestic venture capital funds. Nishith has driven the conceptualization and creation of Imaginarium Aligunjan, a state-of-the-art research facility that stands as an ode to blue sky thinking near Mumbai. At this juncture, I would like to invite Nishith Desai. Would you like to invite Jayant Sinha?
So, Jayant, thank you so much. You've been such a nice friend. I'm able to talk to you in first person all the time, and you've been very generous. So I would be more informal. But thank you for coming. I don't want to take away a single minute from your conversation because you have made a special effort to join us by cutting short your previous engagement and joining us. Thank you so much. I just want to tell my friends that, there is a huge opportunity, and I think there will be, even the marketplace would change. I was just reading one interesting article in Financial Times yesterday, and in a recent report by UK government on the Fly Zero initiative, it concluded that in order to meet net zero commitment, 50% of the commercial flights, or commercial fleet would have to be hydrogen powered by 2050. So whatever may be the technology, we'll have to act, and otherwise if we do not do, then the policy regimes would not allow us to fly the way we want to, and every business is going to be impacted. And there are great opportunities for LPs, GPs, about which we can discuss separately. And investment in green transition will be driven mainly by 3 factors: government policies, technology viability, and social acceptance. I think we have to really drive these 3 forces together and move fast forward. Over to you, Jayant Bhai, if I may call you so. And once again, thank you so much. Please, and we have already with us Uday Khemka. He will give some comments after you have conversation. Then we'll have some other people wanting to raise hands and talk about a few things. But let us take this forward and welcome my personal great. I'm so grateful to you for making this. Thank you. So over to you, Jay.
Very good evening, Nishith. Hi, I hope you all can hear me loud and clear. And thank you for your flexibility and accommodating my schedule today. It's been a bit of a crazy day. I had to speak in Parliament on a bill that was introduced this afternoon. Thankfully, we were able to pass it. But it was a bill that was related to climate change, and I'm glad I got a chance once again in Parliament itself, in the Lok Sabha, to talk some more about why it's vitally important for India to pursue a much more sustainable trajectory development pathway.
And congratulations to you for getting the President of India now from Jharkhand. And having new airport in Jharkhand. A lot of news we read about, and I think you contributed a lot. So I'm sorry for my interruption, but wonderful.
No, it's been an eventful few days for all of those reasons, Nishith Bhai. So one quick logistical item though, which is that I do have a presentation which I think you will enjoy seeing, and we just need to make sure my colleague can join as a panelist so that he can share that with you all. So I think he's trying to join as a panelist, Nishith Bhai. Has Has he been able to do so yet? Let me just check with him 1 second.
If I can have his mobile number, I can coordinate so that we can send him a link.
I'm just checking to see. Let's see. Yes. Okay. All right. I think it should work now. Hopefully that should work. All right. Super. So with that, let me just tell you about some of the work that I have been doing over the last few years. I took over as the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance 3 years ago. And I had for a long time been thinking about, what is the right development model for India? What should India's development trajectory be? And it was clear that the pathway that, the West had followed, the US had followed, Europe had followed, and then the East Asian countries, Korea, Japan, and then most notably and most recently, China had followed, was probably not going to be the development model that India should follow. What should India's development model be? In any case, most of those were manufacturing intensive development models. India has followed a much more services driven approach. And so we really need to think about, what's the right way to set up India's development. So that was one set of questions. And then, as I said, 3 years ago, I began to also start to look into all the sustainability issues. And it became clear to me that we would have to come up with a completely different development model for India. And that's led to this thinking around the Green Frontier Development Model, which is what I want to share with you all this evening. So Arjun, if you can start to share the presentation, is that possible for you? I think, Nishith Bhai, what my colleague Arjun is saying is that he needs to get pulled in as a panelist to be able to share. Okay, yeah, that's it. The office of
we'll just organize in a second. Just tell them. Yeah. Mukesh or Devanshi, can you just coordinate that?
It's showing it as Office of Jayant Sinha, make a co-panelist.
Yeah, that's right.
That is there. Now, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have all the technology working for us. So what I want to share with you is really, what has resulted in this 3-4 year investigation that I have been conducting on how India should develop. And the conclusion I've come to is that we really need to follow a very different development model that the rest of the world has followed. And I call it getting to the green frontier. But it's fundamentally about, being able to achieve sustainability even as we grow our GDP and create jobs. Next page. So if you ask an economist today, how does development happen? They will tell you that development is really farm to factory. We take people working in paddy fields and we take them out of paddy fields where they're producing, 10, 15, 20,000 rupees a month worth of output. And we put them in a factory where they are producing 1 lakh rupees worth of output a month. And as they produce more, they can earn more and therefore have a better quality of life. And the two vectors that drive it are industrialization, which is putting people into factories, and urbanization, because people are now in these factories in these big cities. And that's really how you develop. And that's, by the way, how the West developed, how Japan developed, how Korea developed, and how China has developed. In fact, this is a picture of Chinese farmers in a paddy field, and then Chinese ladies working in a garment factory in China. So that's the standard development model that the world has followed, which economists say is farm to factory. Next page. And if you look at it in a more abstract way, what you'll find is that on the one hand, we have the planet, which is the state of natural resources, the carrying capacity. And on the other hand, we have what people want: jobs, wealth, GDP, etc. And it's technology, the industrialized urbanization, that takes people from farm and enables us to produce more. And that's what we do given our technological capabilities. And that's the theory of the farm to factory development model. We produce more as we apply and use technology. Next page. And this is the way to look at it. What happens is, we move from one production curve to another production curve. This is the production frontier. The two vectors of industrialization and urbanization drive this, and we are able to produce more, and we are obviously better off, the planet is better off, and people are better off. That's the theory. Next page. Unfortunately, the reality is different. The reality is that the farm to factory development model is a development model which is not sustainable, certainly not for India, given where we are right now. We have a number of problems we're dealing with. And one problem that people don't really associate with sustainability, but in fact is very closely associated with sustainability, is pandemics. The reason we've had the coronavirus, and we had SARS before that, we had MERS before that, we had AIDS before that, all of these viruses that are developing are zoonotic viruses. Zoonotic means they come from one mammalian species, spill over into human beings. And because our immune system is not set up and hasn't built immunity against these other viruses, we then have these unchecked pandemics till we develop vaccines and other ways of combating it and strengthen our immune system. So pandemics themselves, what we've gone through, $10 trillion of lost economic output or even more because of the coronavirus, is in fact because we're on this unsustainable development trajectory where we're encroaching on natural habits. We started to go into areas where, there were bats that were carrying these coronaviruses. The bats then, brought it to humanity in some fashion. But it was really a sustainability question more than anything else. Climate change, very, very serious set of crises that are developing. I will go into that in detail. And then also there is a job creation problem associated with the farm to factory development model. And that is that because of automation, capital intensity, labor intensity coming down, it's not possible for us, for India, to create sufficient, I think, jobs to be able to follow the farm to factory development model. So the traditional manufacturing intensive farm to factory development model, I don't think works for India. Next page. Let's talk a little bit about climate change, because it's not just in the headlines all the time. It is a full-blown planetary emergency that we're dealing with. As you know, carbon parts per million have crossed levels that we have not seen in 250,000 years, and they are now at 421 parts per million. So we pumped a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, and as when you pump carbon into the atmosphere and it is there, it's like a blanket around the earth, and as a blanket around the earth, obviously temperatures go up. Next page. And what you see is that we have already hit close to this 1.1, 1.2 degrees centigrade, which is where we are right now in terms of the temperature increase. People are saying that by 2030, we'll get to 1.5 degrees. We'll breach the 1.5 degree barrier by 2030. So in just these last 200 years, we've got to increase of 1.1, 1.2 degrees centigrade. Very quickly, we'll get to 1.5. But now the projections are that we are going to go to somewhere between 1.4 to 4.4 degrees centigrade in the next 80 years, with the most likely predictions hovering around 2.6, 2.7, 2.8 degrees centigrade in terms of where we are going. So the big takeaway here is the following. In 220 years since industrialization started, we have increased temperatures by 1.1, 1.2 degrees centigrade. That's where we are today. Already we have a lot of catastrophic consequences of climate change. The scientific view is that in the next 80 years, we are going to increase this by another 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade. So in 80 years, we are going to have more warming than we've had in the last 200 years. That's really what we're dealing with right now. This is really scary. Next page. And right now, the warming projections are that under current course and speed, under business as usual scenario, we are going to, by 2100, warm up the planet by 2.7 to 3.1 degrees centigrade. So let's just take 2.7. So far, we've hit 1.1. That's in 2022. By 2100, we are going to do another 1.6 degrees centigrade in 80 years. That's where the scientific consensus is. Obviously, people are trying to drive us to net zero, but right now, under current policies, we are nowhere close to net zero by 2050, 2060, or anything else. Next page. What's the impact? The impact of 1.1 degrees centigrade is many more extreme weather events. It's 40 degrees in London, where the previous high was 38.7 degrees. Last year, we had a temperature of 49.7 degrees in the Pacific Northwest in the US. And these kinds of extreme weather events, these heat waves, are happening much more frequently. Droughts are happening much more frequently. Cyclones are happening much more frequently because the earth is warming up. And the predictions are right now that these extreme weather events are becoming 30 times, 30 times more likely. So what was happening once in a century is now happening once in 3 years. So we are dealing with a lot of these extreme weather events. In India, we've already incurred losses of $80 billion because of these extreme weather events in the last 20 years or so. Next page. This is the picture of India in April 2022. We had a full-blown heat wave. We had the highest temperatures in northern India in 122 years. Land surface temperatures in Gujarat reached 65 degrees centigrade. This was in April. So this is what these heat waves are like, and this kills people. It results in a situation where we run into blackouts because the electricity system can't cope with this. Next page. Sea level rise is expected to be between 0.5 to 0.8 meters, and this is what happens to Mumbai, this is what happens to Kochi, this is what happens to the Sundarbans, which is where Calcutta is as well. These are annual flood levels are going to be in all these different areas. Now take the 0.5 meters or more of sea level rise, and now couple that with more extreme weather events, more extreme cyclones coming into Mumbai, with storm surges of 2 meters, 3 meters. A lot of Mumbai is going to be underwater. A lot of Mumbai real estate value is going to get destroyed as a result of this. So these are very, very real, very damaging consequences that increasingly we are going to have to confront very soon. So sea level rise is a massively scary and important aspect of what's happening with climate change right now. Next page. Let's look at agriculture. Some 20% of rural districts in India are at very high risk of climate change effects, including extreme drought and very high heat waves. Many of the major crops in India are going to be down by 5 to 20% in terms of overall production. And we already saw it this year when we had an extreme heat wave in April and May. Wheat production in India dropped by 10% this year, and India had to stop exports of wheat completely because we needed the wheat for India alone. So this is the problem in India. It's going to happen around the world, which means food prices are going to go up as they've gone up this year because of the heat wave. So food is going to be hit hard because of these stresses, these weather stresses that we're dealing with. Next page. And so India's trajectory is simply not sustainable. Many of the developed countries in the world have said that they're going to go to net zero by 2050. China itself has said that they'll do it by 2060. And India's business as usual scenario, when we look at total greenhouse gases, which includes methane along with carbon, what we find when we do the modeling is that under the business as usual case, India's carbon emissions, I'll get into this in more detail, India's carbon emissions, which are 3.5 billion tons right now, are going to increase to 7 billion tons. The world is committing to reducing carbon emissions by 2050. The world is rapidly reducing carbon emissions. It's 55 billion tons right now. But India is actually increasing from 3.5 billion to 7 billion over the next 30 years. So just purely because of the international pressure and the point that India, will reach 30 to 40% of global emissions, our current trajectory is not sustainable. Not only because it's bad for the climate, but because the rest of the world is going to say, look, India, you can't keep on putting more carbon into the atmosphere. Next page. Along with the sustainability issues, the climate and other natural resource constraints that we face, we have another set of challenges in India as we think about our development. We are not creating enough good jobs. So when I talk about Bhola Mehto, who is a voter that I have in Tati Jharia block in Hazaribagh, if I go to Bhola Mehto and say, what type of job do you want, Bhola? He'll say, I don't want a job in the informal sector. I don't want to work on a construction site. And I don't want to work in a dhaba. I don't want a job in a dhaba. Instead, he would say, give me a job in the government so I can, have a comfortable life. Or alternatively, give me a job in the IT services sector. So I have a nice white collar job with, a predictable salary and a paycheck coming in all the time. So that's the kind of job Bhola Mehto wants. Next page. Unfortunately, we are not able to produce those kinds of high quality jobs. Today, India's workforce is about 1 billion people. Of the billion people, about 500 million are active, they're working. And this includes agriculture, by the way, so it's total workforce. But out of the 500 million people who are working in India today, and we have a very low labor force participation rate. I mean, the government data says about 50%, but other people believe it might even be lower, might even be closer to 40%. So we have a situation of the 500 million people who are working in India, 400 million are working on construction sites, in shops, in dhabas, and who really don't want those jobs. If you look at the formal jobs where you are getting a regular paycheck, that's only 100 million. And out of that 100 million, 35 million are in the government and government allied sectors like railway and military and so on. The number of private sector formal jobs is only 65 million. And that 65 million is holding up 1.4 billion people in effect. In addition, we are going to get another 200, 250 million people joining the workforce over the next 15 to 20 years. So where are they going to find high quality jobs? What's going to happen to them? That's a second very important issue that we need to consider as we think about India's development model. Next page. So what do we have to offer Bhola Mehto? He's on a farm. He's making 7,000 rupees a month. And the only opportunities in front of him are to go to the city and become, for example, an auto rickshaw driver making 15,000 rupees a month. It's a factory job. It's a polluting job, and it's resulting in chaotic urbanization. This is the reality of India today. Should we ask him to take this kind of a factory job, this kind of a brown job? Next page. All that will do is keep us on this current path, which, as I've just explained, is totally unsustainable. It's just not going to create enough good, high quality jobs. And it's going to just result in more carbon emissions, more pollution, and so on. So we are in a situation today where we don't have much to offer to Bhola Mehto. We are just putting him and India on an unsustainable trajectory. Next page. What we really need to do is we need to think differently. We need to get Bhola Mehto not a brown job, but a green job. Instead of becoming an auto rickshaw driver making 15,000 rupees a month, is it possible for Bhola to get a green job where, for instance, he starts driving an electric cab? He is a salaried employee, a driver working for an electric cab company, and he's using payment systems to bill people. He's using a dispatch system on a smartphone that allows him to go find jobs to pick up. That's what we need to do for Bhola Mehto. We need to put him into these innovation-driven formal jobs. Next page. And that's what I call the green frontier development model. Instead of taking the business as usual development model with rising emissions, insufficient job creation, inadequate economic growth, chaotic urbanization, instead of this development model, the farm to factory development model that economists talk about, we need a different development model altogether for India. And I call this the green frontier model, which is headed towards net zero, is driven off a net zero pathway, and is a much better development model for India. Next page. The green frontier development model means that we take our power systems, our electricity systems, convert it completely to renewables. We transform all of our vehicles to electric. We scale up these green businesses in hydrogen and biofuels and distributed energy, and we link into a global carbon trading system so that we really are able to pursue this net zero pathway. That's the green frontier development model that we need for India. So decarbonization becomes our development. The big headline here is decarbonization becomes development. Next page. And if you want to look at it visually, instead of putting Bhola Mehto in an auto rickshaw, we put him in an electric cab. And that process of continuous innovation takes us to the green frontier. Next page. Now, I'm not making this up. There is, in fact, an electric cab company called Blue Smart, which can take a Bhola Mehto. And in fact, I'm trying to help them get people from Hazaribagh and train them so that they can, in fact, drive electric cabs. And other companies like Idea Forge, which is a drone company, NutriFresh, which is a hydroponics company, Chai Point, which is doing a completely net zero model, Electric Pay, Ola, many, many green frontier industries that are really, really positioning India on the green frontier. And the green frontier really is about green technologies and digital technologies. If we bring that combination together, green plus digital, we are going to have just a massive, massive set of investment opportunities. Next page. And we have to do it now. In this particular work that we've been doing, these modeling studies that we've been looking at for these net zero pathways, we've been looking at carbon emissions. And in this business as usual case, you can see that carbon emissions go up to $5.8 billion under current, 5.8 billion gigatons under current course and speed. That's simply not sustainable, as I've explained earlier. We have to get to net zero by 2070, as the Honorable Prime Minister has said. But what that means, and you should look at the green line, we have to act now. We have to bend the curve now. And if we bend the curve, and this is my big headline, if there's one takeaway, if there's one thing you should remember from today's discussion, net zero is net positive for India. Net zero is net positive for India. We have to do it now. And if we do it now, we are going to get very, very positive benefits from it. Next page. And here are some of the positives. Net zero is net positive. If you look at GDP growth, you'll find the GDP growth in the green scenarios, the net zero by 2070, net zero by 2050, is actually superior to the current development model that we are following. Next page. And if you look at job creation, the idea of Bhola Mehto finding jobs and being able to also move towards net zero is entirely feasible. The detailed modeling work we are doing with the best modeling groups in the world at Stanford, at Tufts, at MIT, Cambridge Econometrics in the UK, all of this detailed modeling work is telling us that net zero is actually net positive for India. Next page. Here's a very important chart. Now, some of my friends tell me I should use this chart before the GDP chart, because if you actually look at lives saved because of lower pollution, because you're shutting down fossil fuels, the numbers are staggeringly large. Today in India, we're losing between 1 million to 2 million people a year because of air pollution, because of 2.5 nanometer particles. And you know what Delhi is like in October, November because of air pollution. India is the most polluted country in the world. Air pollution is killing 1 million to 2 million people a year, when COVID at its peak was killing 250,000 people a year. So this is an order of magnitude bigger than COVID, what is happening because of air pollution. And obviously, when we move towards green technologies, we're shutting down fossil fuels, we're shutting down air pollution, and it's saving us millions and millions of lives. So net zero is net positive as a result of that. Next page. And fossil fuel imports are massive. We are already importing $230 billion a year of fossil fuels, $230 billion. Out of our imports of $600 billion, 230, a third is fossil fuels. So if we can eliminate fossil fuels and reduce them, we are going to be able to improve our balance of payments and save a lot of foreign currency by not having to import fossil fuels. It's very, very positive for our national security as well. Next page. And what this means for Bhola Mehto is we are able to, as I said, put him in an electric cab, or alternatively, we put him into a net zero dairy industry where, for example, he can stay on his farm, he can actually use modern methods of dairy farming and be able to still generate a green frontier job of 30,000 rupees a month. Next page. But it's not just about Bhola Mehto, friends. It's also about Geeta Oraon. As I said, NutriFresh is an example of a green frontier company that's doing hydroponics. If we can bring this kind of hydroponic farming to Patratu block, which is where Geeta Ora and other of my voters is, then we are in a position where she can get a higher income, make 30,000 rupees a month, but we are at the same time decarbonizing and improving, everybody's lives as a result of that. So it's continuous innovation that will enable this to happen. Next page. Now, here is the real trick. The real trick here is that to get to net zero by 2070, we are going to need a lot of capital. And I know there are several people from the investment management industry on this call. Let me tell you, this is the biggest investment opportunity that we are ever going to see. And digital was big for India. Hundreds of billions of dollars has come into India to invest in digital technologies and Flipkart and Paytm and Ola and Swiggy and Zomato. These are all digital technologies. Green is going to be way bigger than digital, way bigger. For us to get to net zero by 2070, we are going to need incremental investment of $2 to $3 trillion, which means $100 billion a year starting now. And just so you understand what $100 billion means for India annually, recognize that our total investment in India annually is $300 to $400 billion from both public as well as private sources. So the total investment going into India right now is $300 to $400 billion. We now need to add another $100 billion a year to get to net zero. That's a massive, massive investment boom that we're going to unlock if we go towards net zero aggressively, and we are committed to doing so. This is, as I said, going to be the biggest investment opportunity, the biggest business opportunity we are ever going to see. And it's going to continue for the next 30 or 40 years because we have to completely transform India's economy. Next page. Now, for India to get $100 billion a year, we can only do it if there is a climate alliance that gets created between the global north and the global south. So India makes a commitment and says, okay, I will on a statutory basis and a legally binding basis commit to net zero by 2070. In return, the global north, which it has not done so far, commits to hundreds of billions of dollars of capital mobilized and flowing into India. That's the only way we can make this happen, is through this global climate alliance. And there's a lot of work going on here. I'm a member of many different track 2 discussions between India and the EU, between India and the US, India and the UK, and we are working this on a track 2 basis so that we can really, really make this happen. Next page. There are some excellent models to build on for climate alliances. There's an IMF carbon pricing model. There's the EU Fit for 55 program. There's the Paris Agreement. We want it to be so that it's inclusive, but at the same time market driven, because only if we can make it something where we generate returns are we going to get the trillions of dollars to make this possible. And so these are the kinds of climate alliances that have to be strengthened, improved, so that we can have a market driven, inclusive approach towards this type of net zero is net positive development, green frontier development. Next page. And as I said, this market-driven approach, if you were to look at the entire global south, we're talking about something in the range of India, $100 billion, but the rest of the global south, perhaps another $200 billion. So maybe $300 billion. And much of it is coming through MDBs, maybe 20 to 25% of it is coming through multilateral development banks, the MDBs. But the bulk of it, and I'm sure this is music to Nishith Bhai's ears, because he's such a pioneer of the fund management industry and external capital coming into India. The bulk of this money is going to have to come into funds. It's going to have to come into private equity funds, venture capital funds, into NIF and other such institutions. And that's where this capital has to flow from the north to the south, a network of green financing institutions in country that are able to mobilize and deploy this capital. Next page. And this is India's climate moment. So the Honorable Prime Minister has already been very successful with the International Solar Alliance. Now we are assuming the G20 presidency in November, December. We've got to make this discussion of the Global Climate Alliance absolutely front and center in the G20 presidency. It can therefore then result in these hundreds of billions of dollars flowing to India and the rest of the global south. which then drives green development, drives sustainability and net zero emissions pathways. And in doing so, we save India and we save the world. Because obviously, we are, as I said, in a full-blown planetary emergency when it comes to climate change. And the only way we can really solve this is we create the Global Climate Alliance. We have the Global North and the Global South coming together to make this happen. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. I think it's, as I see, it's so difficult to communicate long-term consequences and long-term vision. We are all living in day-to-day, present kind of thing, yes, but at the same time, how do we communicate that to the larger group of people and make them aware? I think, and at this point in time, if you can bear with me and us, I would like Uday to talk a little bit about what he's doing and how he's helping and how we can all work together. So whole idea of this meeting was to see, is there something each one of us can contribute and really take it forward, the messages that you have given to us. So of course, for me personally, the question is that communicating the consequences and, the vision for the next 30, 40, 50 years, it's very scary in many ways, but at the same time, if we decide, nothing is impossible. So Uday, can I just request you to, and thank you for pulling your time off from your vacation in Switzerland right now, and last day of holiday, and you've been very generous. So if you can just tell, you've been involved very much into this space, and it will be very helpful to have few words from you.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking to you. Jayant ji is a very tough act to follow. But what I want to say about what he's just said is how unique and important it is. My journey with working on climate issues and India and the COP process began in Rio in 1992. So this year is my 30th year working on this subject. And I've never in those 30 years heard a presentation as coherent, cogent, and persuasive as the one that you've just heard today. And that means a lot, because I've always said what's missing in India is climate satyagraha, telling the truth about climate change. It's something that has not been, if it was inconvenient in the North, it has been even more inconvenient for us. And before I try and respond with one or two constructive comments that Nishith Bhai, you've provoked, I would just say that the narrative of India's engagement with climate change has changed so dramatically in these 30 years. If I remember what the tone was of the Indian delegation in Rio in 92, it was highly defensive. It was like, how dare they, just when development is coming along, pull away the cup from us? And let's use per capita carbon emissions as a shield. I remember speaking to a member of the delegation and said, why do we always use that shield? And he said, you have to remember that we were always outgunned in the WTO negotiations. There were 30 negotiators for every 2 we had. So we felt it was convenient to just keep that shield. But it was a defensive mentality. In what Jayant has just said, that net zero is net positive for India, you have a very succinct antidote to that way of thinking. That actually, and we're not alone, by the way, in seeing that opportunity. But for us, it could be a tremendous opportunity because of the scale of our own market and our strategic positioning in the global economy. My own background, very briefly, I won't bore you, is I've been a business person for 34 years now, and I started off my career also focusing on the green sector in the late 80s at Morgan Stanley. But more importantly, at my family's foundation, the Kemker Foundation, after Terry, we may be the oldest family foundation focusing obsessively on climate change mitigation. And I was a lone player for many years. Now you have the ICC and many other organizations. So I'm really thrilled that we're all very, very coordinated or increasingly coordinated about it. I won't go into any of those journeys. There have been 3 narratives in my life. One is on the philanthropy side. One is climate philanthropy itself, bringing together a global marketplace in that. 2 is climate finance. I'll come back to that. And 3 is working with India in various ways over these last 30 years at the federal and state levels. With respect to my business career, I'm vice chairman of a group called the Sun Group. In 2015, I came to my board and I said, look, I've been serving you guys for 25 years. From now to the day I die, would you please give me your blessings only to invest in and build businesses that stop climate change? And I got that mandate. So now day and night, I only focus on climate change. So I'm obviously thrilled to hear what Jayant said, and all of it, without exception, is spot on. All of it, without exception, is spot on. In that context, what can I offer in return? Perhaps something. I have been focused on the area of institutional finance for climate change since around 2005, when the Prince of Wales in the UK created a group called the Pension 8. In those days, there was a G8, so it was called the P8, of the largest pension funds in the world looking at green infrastructure investing. It was a wonderful idea. It was 10 years ahead of its time. Many good things came out of it. The first $800 million in green bonds, the Catalyst Fund of the IFC and the CP3 fund of the ADB and various other institutional innovations came out of that era. But what we learned was how institutional investors, who are your LPs if your GPs listening in this call, or who are very large-scale direct investors with NIF in large-scale green infrastructure, how do they really think about this? And over these decades, I have wondered why the very simple concept of blended finance that was indicated in the Global Climate Alliance, at least implicitly, why that has failed us. Why has it failed us? We talked in COP, and many of us were in COP 15 as well in Copenhagen, the 100 billion, which hasn't materialized in Glasgow. And why has there been a fundamental failure of the West to deliver this capital? Lots of reasons for that. We don't have time to debate that. And that's probably what the Global Climate Alliance, at least as one of its mandates, is trying to address. But I would argue to you that there are two core elements that have been missing. One is the approach to climate finance has been dominated by capital markets people who think about instruments, as opposed to institutional finance people who think about structures. So what do I mean by that? I would use the example of since we're talking about local employment at the village level, a mithai wala who sets up his shop. There's lots of good goodies in the shop. Someone has to come there and eat the food. I would contrast that to a 18th century British election where the rotten borough would get everyone into horses and carts and move them to the voting booth with offers of beer and get them to vote. The difference between that cart, which organizes everyone to damn well get in it, and an instrument which you expect to self-serve, is the singular reason why climate finance has failed so dramatically, in my opinion, in the last 20 years. The second reason, sorry, I should say that I also ran the Clean Energy Finance Forum for the Indian government and the US government. When it was set up by the US government and the Indian government, we got 110 financial institutions together and provided policy recommendations to Minister Piyush Goyal at the time. And finally, I now am in a position of advising 45 sovereign wealth funds, which I'll come back to in a minute. So the second problem is that there's been nobody to talk to on the institutional side. These northern governments have all sorts of political constraints. The US government, forgive me, I'm talking to Indians, I assume, with my Indian passport, is the US government is highly constrained, as you all know. With one senator can blow up an entire agenda, and every year you need to get funding from Congress. It's a mess. The Europeans are in better shape, the Japanese are in slightly better shape, but everyone feels, unless there's a crisis that affects them in the short term, the political will to develop the kind of money we are talking about is limited. So the real question is, how the heck can we get them to put in the 100 billion that, after all, after 200 years of visiting us, and other people have talked about this more eloquently than I can, perhaps it's time for them to reinvest in our part of the world, particularly when they created the model that's now destroying the planet. So in that sense, how do we make it happen? And I would argue to you that intense pragmatism is required. Two kinds of pragmatism. And one kind was already embedded in the Copenhagen summit, What do I mean by that? I remember having long discussions with the then Prime Minister's office in Delhi and with the White House. And I was pushing very hard the idea that we should allow, if northern governments organize institutional funding into deliverable time-bound pools of capital, that should count against the 100 billion for the South. And the South should say, okay, if you guys actually do it, if you get that together and you put capital in the game to de-risk that capital and you deliver it in a structured fashion, in a timely way, we will allow it to count against your 100 billion. And this was implicitly recognized in the Copenhagen Treaty by the words "and any other sources," which was embedded, and we felt it was a great victory, those of us who were fighting for climate institutional finance, to be part of the solution to North-South, the big North-South gap, which we already anticipated at that time. Unfortunately, we have absolutely wasted 13 years to use that mechanism effectively. There are many small blended finance tools and small funds. And for example, the Danish Climate Fund would be an example of that. There's small funds, a few $100 million here and there. But in the face of that 100 billion that India needs, that Genji was talking about, this is, yes, it's about venture. Yes, it's about PE. But at the end of the day, if we want to solve this problem, it's about infrastructure yield, equity, and debt on scale. And if we want to go in that direction, the opportunity is huge, the need is huge, but there is an opportunity on the other side as well. What do I mean by that? I mean by that of course, today we have this huge upsurge in inflation, interest rates, and yields. But just ignore the last 3 months and look at the long trend. The long trend has been that Western pension institutions and sovereign wealth funds are unable to meet their liabilities. They're unable to do so because yield from traditional infrastructure classes where they can invest has been ever declining. And therefore, they are desperate to have new asset classes emerge where they can get better yield. Now, you may well say, but don't we want the lowest yield possible? And I would argue that that time will come. We've seen it in solar in India. But today, a lot of what's happening is being funded by private equity and by venture. And that's fantastic at the innovation end. But it will never suffice for the scale-up end of what we need. The railroads in the US, the ports in the US, the canals were not funded by private equity. They were funded by infrastructure equity, and they were funded by debt. So how do we get that scale of infrastructure money into our country? And I would argue that as the West feels the heat, excuse the pun, of the North-South dialogue, and Sharm el-Sheikh is coming, and the G20 is happening in Indonesia, and then we're hosting it next year. I mean, there's a whole cascade. Abu Dhabi, I was with the Abu Dhabi climate minister 2 weeks ago, and they were characterizing it as a Southern COP, which I found very amusing, given how wealthy Abu Dhabi is. And they said, look, we're Asia. But we've got a whole series of these moments in the next 24 months, which the Global Climate Alliance concept is a wonderful central bedrock for this repeated series of moments. But I would argue that the concept of blended finance, the time has come. Why has it come? The second, for two reasons. One, the institutional finance community has finally said to the capital markets people, get out of the way. We know how to do this. We've created structures of hundreds of billions of dollars in the past that are timely, that are time-bound and deliverable. Secondly, there are for the first time groups of institutions, institutional investors, not only talking in the GFANS manner. If those of you are familiar with GFANS, the famous $130 trillion announcement in Copenhagen, so in COP26, wherein they said they were all working together. But you must understand what that is. That is not about delivering short-term money between now and the end of the decade to India. That's about retooling the incentives around capitalism. That's about credit reporting. That's about accounting standards. That's about balance sheet standards. It's not about actually mobilizing very large scale of money and delivering that money to India and other southern countries. There are, however, for the first time, groups of people coming together with an institutional finance background, not a capital markets background, who are willing to engage in these blended finance dialogues. I happen to represent one of those groups. So Like an early Christian in the Roman Empire, I have managed to finagle my way into being the senior climate advisor to a group of 45 of the 60 largest sovereign wealth funds on the planet. If you take all owned capital on the planet, 3 years ago, that was $56 trillion. My number's a little bit out of date. Top of the pyramid for that was 60 institutions with $18 trillion. The organization that I'm now senior climate advisor to represents 45 of those 60 and 13 trillion of that 18 trillion. Now, what makes it different to the GFANS world is that these investors have come together selfishly. Forgive me. I don't mean that in a bad way. They've come together to make real investments as co-investments between them to actually invest on very large scale. There's a particular place in health for me reserved because I managed to, over 10 years, persuade them that as they work with host governments and in their scale, they can only invest in partnership with host governments, that education and healthcare were too small in terms of deal size, and that they really needed to focus on the green revolution that Jayant Ji was talking about as the greatest intergenerational investment opportunity of our time. He said it, and I'm reinforcing that message. There is no question. The way we build our power, the way we transport ourselves, the way we build our buildings, the way we decarbonize our industries, the way we do our agriculture, etc., etc. It's in everything. There used to be such a thing as a green sector. Today, every sector has to be green. That's a massive opportunity, massive opportunity. And we managed to persuade them by 2017 that they should make this their central focus. And I was put in that position. In 19, we hosted a summit by a presumably now long forgotten British Prime Minister called Theresa May. And we got together and we hosted this big summit. We had 62 CEOs of sovereign wealth funds who came together and in London with this focus. And they said, absolutely do it. They chose a demonstration sector, which is sustainable transportation. And I'll come back to that. But they also said, work with northern governments to figure out this blended finance thing once and for all on scale. And we are willing to be the negotiating counterparty to those conversations in a long-term way, in a sense that we believe is more difficult for a disparate community of fund managers. And that has led to a really remarkable process that led to a G7 summit that I hosted in Munich 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, at the end of the G7, where we brought together sovereign wealth funds, the US government, the European Union, the Japanese government, and representatives from the sustainable transport sector from India. So, we had, and from Indonesia, who came, and many other governments, the Danish government, the French, a variety of other governments, and industry, in what we call the trilateral conversation, arguing that capitalism takes time for all these threads to weave together to lower risk. For example, in sustainable transport, it'll take 10 years for all of it to be as mature as renewable energy. How can we force that function so that the risk collapses and do it in 2 years? The only way we can do that is bringing governments, industry, and long-term investors together in the same room. And that's what we did. We chose the theme of municipal buses as a demonstration sector. The summit went well. We're now going back to Brussels and back to the US, trying to figure this out. How can we put together very large-scale institutional finance alongside a smaller amount of northern government money, but in such a way that it closes that small risk-return gap? Now, we all know what those gaps are. There's the rupee devaluation problem with low yield. There is the problem of our institutions, our cities and their credit quality, our PSUs and their credit quality, our discoms and their credit quality. This is old stuff. But that doesn't mean we should not continue to address it. But instead of, Jayantji, my only submission to you, what you said earlier, is instead of anchoring it around the 2070 target, if we can break it into more specific sub-targets for 2030 and say, you know what, we're willing to move towards full bus electrification by 2030, but this is what we need from you guys, and bring together the real experts in that subdomain to crack the puzzle of de-risking and make sure then that that money goes into where it needs to go into on municipal credit or wherever else it needs to go into, then we have a series of these unlockings, because I would like to end where you began, if I may. I have been working for 30 years on climate change. And one of the people I've been working with over these decades is a man called Sir David King. And Dave, who's a great friend, was the chief scientific advisor to the British government and the chief climate envoy of the British government. And he now runs the Cambridge University Centre on Climate Change. And just, when we met in Scotland, in Glasgow, I said, Dave, isn't this wonderful? Wonderful. It's the first time business is in the room in this way. In Paris, we had it in the margin. Mainly the French companies were there. In Copenhagen, it wasn't there really. We were talking about green jobs and green opportunity, but the biggest company CEOs were not there. They're all around us. Isn't this exciting? This is like Davos. Isn't this the turning point for the planet? And he said, no, it isn't. So I said, what do you mean it isn't? And he said, it isn't because we should have done this in Rio. Now, let's explain. The issue of what he explained to me terrified me. And it was so scary, but it fits directly with what Jayant was saying. So he said, look, even though you're so excited about business getting its act together, a 30-year trajectory is just not going to make it, because we are tipping over all the natural tipping points this decade. He gave me the example of the fact that NATO satellites over the Siberian tundra have noticed over 1,000 events of very large-scale explosive methane release, leaving craters the size of American football stadia in the last 18 months. And you are all well aware that what methane does is to then accelerate global warming. He then explained that he'd spoken to a climate scientist friend of his, I promise not to go on for much longer, who is a professor of climatology. He spoke to him in January of 2021. And the guy said, look, it's minus 30 degrees. It's so cold, but the Sami people who I work with and live with know how to deal with that. They've done that for 10,000 years. He called him in June and he said, it's now 33 degrees. Everything is melting. No one has ever seen anything like this in the Arctic. You are familiar with the fact that even though it may be 1.1 degrees on average for the planet, it's 4 degrees up in the Arctic in terms of climate, heat. And that is terrifying, because what's happening is an acceleration as the reflective capacity of the Arctic keeps diminishing. So as that happened last summer, what happened last summer has happened this summer as well. So this is now becoming endemic in the Arctic, releasing this huge hot air bubble. What that did was to push that cold finger of polar vortex freezing air to Texas. You remember the Texas freeze last year. And it then tipped over the Gulf Stream, the jet stream, bringing hot tropical air, which burnt California in the way that Jayant mentioned earlier on. I was intrigued to find that the heat wave that Europe is now experiencing, the UK highest temperatures on record ever, is because of a distortion in the same jet stream. And in fact, a piece of the jet stream has become unlocked and is swirling around just off the coast of Spain. So we are seeing fundamental weather destabilization events. And the climate satyagraha, that I don't mean it in terms of protest, I mean it in terms of holding to truth, that Jayantji started with, is so required, because I completely agree with him. Whereas on paper, we may be the third most vulnerable country on the planet. Can we really live with our conscience, knowing full well that hundreds of millions of people are going to be moving from our coastlines inland, that Punjab is going to become like Rajasthan, like our rivers are not going to be glacier fed, but only rain fed? The level of pain for our country, for our countrymen and women, is so outrageous that we must therefore open our minds to the other statement that Jayantji made, which is the opportunity. Because the opportunity is all around us. If we can't see that today, then we are particularly blind. It isn't about one or two green GPLP structures being created. And I'm thrilled that I've had about 10 approaches in the last 6 months from young GPs saying, can you help us? Can you think with us? So that clearly as there's a burgeoning number of green funds that are being created in India, that's great. But actually every private equity fund has to be thinking about stranded risk in the way Jayantji said earlier, and also opportunity in whatever subsector they're in. I'll stop on that basis, but I am so privileged to be part of this conversation. It's time for India to show what we can do to the planet and not be a recipient of all their moralizing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jayantji. You've been really patient. And you can see not only passion in Uday, but also I call it dear obsession. And unless we have obsessive people like him, some of these things will never be understood. I know it took a little longer time, but it's very,
I'm sorry
very
about that. I
interesting.
apologize.
No, I think we are going to cut this, video into different parts and circulate to, a lot of people around. So, this is very, very important. I know we spent a little more time than what we thought, but that is, I think you can see the claps that are going around. And only one thing I wanted to do was Dhanpal, if he's still there, he wanted to say a word, but today, I don't know. But Jayanji, I think we would like to have a few more concluding remarks from you.
Let me just jump in. First of all, I really applaud everything that Uday has done, and he is a pioneer and a leader and a thinker in this area. And I wish we could all be as motivated and as committed as he is. We do a little bit in that regard. And here's the most important thing. Uday, I want your number. Please send it to me right away so that we can join forces and we can start to work on this. My email ID is jsinha21@gmail.com. Anybody is welcome to email me, jsinha21@gmail.com. So please email me. I think we've got to join forces. And Uday's exactly right. We have to get the large investors of the world and the governments together so that we can put these blended capital instruments at scale, working. And I'm doing my level best to be able to do that as well. And really what I have tried to set up for, the prime minister, the president, and people like that is really a quid pro quo, if you will, a global grand bargain where, we commit to net zero. And actually, the Honorable Prime Minister said in Glasgow that he would like to do net zero by 2070, but he put a big if there. And that big if was if he were to get trillions of dollars of investment. So right now, India is not committed to net zero by 2070. And neither, for that matter, has China done it in a statutory, legally binding way as a sovereign treaty. So we still have that step up we have to take in terms of our commitment level. And in the same way, if we can offer that to the global north, then the global north has to offer the capital and the mobilization of that capital. I think that's the grand bargain that we have to try and get at the G20 level and put it on the table and make sure that the presidents and the prime ministers and other heads of state sign up for that. That really is something that we need to strive for. That's the only way we can get out of this. And the good news is that net zero is net positive. It's not that we are asking for something that's going to not be good for the planet. It's going to be fantastic for the planet. And Uday, let me tell you that I'm putting together and working with a variety of different modeling groups around the world so that we can actually start to study net zero pathways in countries around the world, particularly in the global south. None of this work had been done before until I really got after it in terms of understanding what is the GDP impact, the jobs impact, the balance of payments impact, the health impact. That modeling had not been done. And so people were talking literally, hot air was what it was because nobody knew what it meant. Nobody knew how much it would cost. And so we are now trying to build, and Bezos Earth Fund and ClimateWorks and others are helping us build analytical capability around the world so that we can look at these net zero pathways and in fact prove clearly and conclusively that net zero is net positive. And that headline is important. I've been trying to push it as much as I can. And there is a very important aspect of that headline, which again was something that people had not really put out there, which was what's the baseline? You see, when we say that net zero is net positive, which means the net zero pathway is better than the baseline pathway, what is the baseline pathway that you're comparing net zero to, right? And when you go, first of all, the modeling had not been done. And when you actually go and start looking at these baseline pathways, you find that it's a very benign pathway. In India, people said, oh, let's have GDP growth of 5%, for the next 30 years. And I said, well, if you have climate change of 2.5 degrees centigrade, you're not going to have GDP growth of 5% a year. You might be at 2%. And if 2% GDP growth long-term CAGR is your baseline, then net zero is extremely net positive. The numbers I showed you are at a 4.83% long-term average CAGR for India. It's not happening given the kinds of impacts we will get on this warming trajectory that we are on. As you said, it's very likely we're going to hit some global tipping points. And when we hit those global tipping points, then, all bets are off, right? So what's the baseline? And until we really started examining these net zero pathways, nobody even surfaced the question of, if you're looking 30 years out, what's India's baseline? The question of satyagraha, if you go to the policy establishment in India, do you think people want to ask these questions and answer these questions? What's India's 30-year long-term growth rate, folks? How many jobs is that going to create? What is that going to do for carbon emissions? Go find me articles where people are discussing all this stuff. You really have to analytically be able to put this stuff out there and then begin the conversation on these difficult topics.
Thank you for your leadership very, very much.
Yeah. So by the way, my team.
I need your number over there. So
Nishith Bhai, can send that our details in both directions. Delighted to work with you. We don't have a choice, actually. None of us have any choice. It's a dharma.
Wonderful, I think. Thank you so much. In fact, my team has recently been working on developing new and unique blended finance models from a legal perspective. And even so they're working with British Asian Trust in the UK. And we've just been engaged, and we are developing some new models. So I think putting together your ideas, Jayant's ideas, everybody around, this table, it would be wonderful that if we can spare a little more time detailing, because if we think more and put in place some concrete proposals or concrete ideas, I think we can move fast forward. I don't think there is anything that is impossible. I think we have to do it. We have to do it. So we'll be our research team and myself all are personally available, and I'm sure many more from the table around. I think we have to close this, but I don't know if Dhanpal is still there. If he wants to say a word or two, he wanted. I'm sorry we could not take too many questions, but I don't know if there is still time, 10 minutes. So I don't know if anybody wants to raise. Arvind, can you just moderate that just for a few minutes if there is somebody who wants to really speak,
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much, Uday and Jayantji. Are there any questions from the audience or an opinion? We'd love to hear it.
I think there are few people who have raised their hands. And
yeah, I think
you can spend one minute or something like that. It would be very helpful. Jayant, if you don't mind, and Uday, you don't mind.
No, sure. Happy.
Yeah. This idea is to ideate,
So. There's Chandru. Yeah. Hi, Chandru. Can you speak?
Yes. Thank you and good evening. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for the excellent presentation, and Uday for your wonderful articulation. I'm Chandru Badrinarayanan. I used to head MSCI in India before, and now I'm founder of a firm called New Age ESG and Climate Action. So my question is around energy and non-fossil fuel energy. And is India thinking about actually upping the production of nuclear energy? Because that's one of the forms of fuels which is absolutely considered to be green. And India seems to be having a lot of technologies on that. And with new technologies like SMR, is India considering nuclear? That's my question. Thank you.
So Chandru, I presume that question is directed towards me.
Yes, sir.
The answer is yes, but in a very limited way. And of course, when you say India, in this particular case, it means the Atomic Energy Commission, which is responsible for India's long-term nuclear strategies and plans. So yes, they are considering nuclear, and they're considering some of the new compact nuclear reactors at this stage. But as you know, they're super capital intensive, and in a levelized cost per kilowatt hour basis, They're very uneconomic when you compare them to India's other renewable sources such as solar. So there is hesitation in going into nuclear in a big way because of what it means from a cost perspective.
Thank you, sir.
Arvind, next.
Yes.
How many people are there who have raised hands? I don't know.
I could see only Chandru actually.
And
So that's,
Nakul Zaveri is there.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
there's Nakul Zaveri. Yeah. Hello, Nakul. Can you raise your?
Hi.
Can you speak?
Hi, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Thank you for brilliantly laying this out for us, the need for climate investing and the opportunity that's at scale. And again, Uday, thank you very much.
Just a quick interruption. I'm not a minister right now. I'm just a member of parliament.
Sorry, my bad, member of parliament, sir. But, and again, Uday, thank you very much. I appreciate your deep commitment and, we've worked together. So thank you again. My question is to you, Jayantji. I've had the privilege to work since the late 90s on climate investing, have been part when Kyoto Protocol was around, when we worked with the global north. It didn't sustain beyond 2012. Why do you think this time is going to be different? Because as Uday mentioned, this time we need a very, very, very different scale of capital to flow in.
I think what is different this time, or should be different this time, is that we've crossed climate threshold in terms of both temperature rise as well as some of these global tipping points that Uday was alluding to. And if you look at the newspaper headlines in the global north, I'm not saying in the global south, but if you look at what's capturing the public imagination, it is these issues of climate change. In fact, the Germans were telling me that climate change was one of the top 3 issues in their elections that just happened. And certainly it is one of the top issues in the UK and in the US as well. So certainly in the global north, this has become, for all politicians now, a make or break issue. Unfortunately, in India, in the political domain, climate change is probably issue number 21. So it's nowhere in the public imagination or in the general public's consideration. Of course, the effects of climate change are fully there. So we are dealing with drought in Jharkhand right now. I can tell you it's very top of mind with people in Jharkhand. What has not happened in India yet is the connect the dots, where people start to understand that the flooding that they're seeing in the Brahmaputra, the heat wave that we saw in Delhi, the air pollution that we are seeing, all of this is interconnected with climate change and the use of fossil fuels, or really the use of fossil fuels as such, because that's what's leading to climate change also. So we really need to connect the dots. We need to paint the picture. We need to get people to really understand what is happening. And this is where, it's my job, it's my dharma, as exactly as Uday was saying, that I need to get out there and others need to get out there and tell the story. और ये जो कहानी है ना, ये अंग्रेजी में नहीं हो सकती. ये कहानी जो है, this is part of the problem, कि आप ये सब जो पूरा साइंटिफिक और जो वैज्ञानिक और आर्थिक ये सब जो आंकड़े हैं और ये सब जो धारणाएं हैं, कॉन्सेप्ट्स हैं, इनको आपको हिंदी में और ऐसी हिंदी में जो आम जनता समझ सके, और इस प्रकार से आपको समझाना होगा कि लोगों को लगेगा कि ये मेरी जिंदगी से जुड़े हुए हैं और मेरे रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में जुड़े हुए हैं. That communication, that whole art of being able to go from the scientific and economic English literature to the words that and the general public in Hindi will understand, or in Marathi or Tamil will understand, that whole part of narrative creation and narrative setting is yet to happen in India, and that's my dharma. That's what I am focusing on.
Hello, Devin. This is. Do you have a comment, Devin?
Yeah, Arvind, thank you very much, and good to be asking making a suggestion. I have known Uday for the past, I think, 45, 50 years. We've grown up together. And of course, Jayant, we last met in Singapore at the HT Summit. I just have one suggestion. We can get trillions of dollars, but please make sure that there is policy stability. We cannot have a case where governments, I don't want to put it on camera, in South go and reduce a PPA price which they've contracted, because this scares and sends a very bad signal overseas. I've been an investor in renewable energy, as Uday knows. We have renewable energy plants. So one is policy stability. We must have policy stability. The second thing is a very simple solution. As Uday said, let's have a target till 2030 and divide it into subgroups. We have this massive problem of crop agri waste burning in the months of October, November. There is a very simple solution which we have given to the government, is to utilize this to generate steam and power. The problem is that since solar and wind prices are sub 3 rupees, there is no state government is willing to consider a higher price for generating electricity from biomass, because there is a cost to buying this biomass. It's good for the farmer. You can get rid of this problem in the next 2 years. So there has to be a mindset change for waste to energy plants and for pure biomass plants to give a higher price for power, and you will be able to in the next 3 years clean the cities and get rid of this problem which Delhi and northern India has in the months of October to December. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Devin. We've got Dr. Subin Chaturvedi. Dr. Subi, could you go ahead, sir?
Thank you so much, Arvindji, for an excellent moderation and sharing. I'm ever so grateful to the Honorable Member of the Parliament, Jayantji, and Uday, what you spoke was music to my ears. I was one of the first Indians on the United Nations MAG, and I do understand the vagaries and the difficulties of coordinating with intergovernmental organizations, sir. I was also a former professor in Delhi University and currently head global policy for InMobi. My question was to the Honorable Member of Parliament. You just spoke to the question of development and progress, and we've just come out of COVID and we're living in a post-COVID world. Behavior change communication was one of the most important factors. And when you speak about climate change, again, similar questions on how do you get people to care, because when you see climate finance, it's never an end in itself. At Yes Bank, during my previous tenure, we'd put out some of the first green bonds. But unless you're looking at a bottom-up movement where people begin to care about the issue and they start relating it, the government is always pressured. And we've also been on the same side of ease of doing business rankings, of making sure environmental permissions come out quicker than the frameworks that we put together. So if there's anything at all that we can contribute by way of either frameworks or by a bottom-up community-led movement where this becomes the most important issue and a policy priority, we'd love to help and contribute. When you spoke of moments, I'd really love to understand, we've had opportunities both even before the G20 Leadership Summit, where India becomes the swing state and a bridge between the global south and the global north. How is it that you're looking at capitalizing on this opportunity? Because for the first time, we hear someone so articulate, so focused that you speak like a CEO and not just a representative of the people. So I'd love to hear you speak more to that. And very grateful to Nishith Bhai for having us here today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chaturvedi. And of course, I do come from the business world myself, so I have a little bit of experience in putting together these kinds of narratives. But I am now in another life, which is a political life. And the reality is that unless the politics of this country change with respect to climate change, and a lot of that is going to be driven by the Honorable Prime Minister himself, he is totally committed. I think he will have to make a decision in terms of where and how he prioritizes it. He understands the issues totally and completely. And that's why I think the G20 presidency is so important for India, because he is going to drive the narrative, as we would all expect him to drive the narrative, if he sees the benefits coming from the global north. Because it takes, जैसे हिंदी में कहते हैं ना, दोनों हाथ से ताली बजती है, तो दोनों हाथ से ताली बजनी चाहिए. हम एक हाथ से ताली नहीं बजा सकते in this situation, which is that we cannot commit even to net zero because we just don't have the capital to get there. So this is really why we have to work towards this Global Climate Alliance. I came to this idea of the Global Climate Alliance, and I've been working it on the track 2 side. And of course, I've been, as I said, meeting with all the senior leadership as well to really have this convergence. But it's where intent meets capital. I mean, we can have the intent, but unless the capital is there, that's why, I want to work with Uday on this. And really, that capital has to be private sector institutional capital. What the the concessional capital, the MDB, Multilateral Development Bank capital can do is to support the private sector capital. So 80% of this is going to be private sector capital. It's going to be all of you, but we need to support you. As Devanji just said, the policy risk is too high, and we all know if the risks are high, the returns have to be high to compensate that. Now, if the returns have to be 15% USD, right, that's a huge hurdle rate. It's going to cut off half the projects right there. So it needs a lot of fundamental behavioral changes in the policy making establishment to understand how all of this is going to happen. And the good news is we have time. We have 30, 40 years to do this, but we've got to make some big decisions now in this next few years and take advantage of these moments that Uday so correctly alluded to.
Faisal Syed,
Andreas,
question. Faisal.
Andreas, are you in Switzerland now? Hello, Andreas, you're on the call. Okay,
Arvind, I will go.
Yeah, so maybe we have got together.
Yes, Arvind, I think you're extremely well qualified to look into a comment I'm about to make. So I really appreciate what the Honorable Member of Parliament, Jayant Sinha said, and also what Uday Khemka said, and the points that were made. I really appreciated the presentation because that puts on record the effect that India has and will have on the world, given its size. So let me try to address or say something which I think is the elephant in the room, to borrow a pun, which is that as an outsider looking at India, you have two of the wealthiest individuals actually in the petrochemical hydrocarbon space. Now, were they to make a commitment from their family wealth or from their industrial wealth about what will happen with regards to climate change, I think that will have a global impact, because you can read on Bloomberg, who's the richest individual in India, one or two, and then you look up their backgrounds, and then you see that they are still committed or transitioning into that area. So then let me offer this. If you want to address risk returns, and you pointed out a number, the Honorable Jayant Sinha, I understand that. We've seen that number before. China offered that many years ago. In order to de-risk this, and I appreciate the comment made by somebody earlier, I'd like you to consider framing or putting up a framework for those investments so that not just this government or that future governments, as we get to 2030 and beyond, will work under a framework where those investments are protected on a variety of measures or fronts, such that it attracts the private capital. Because when private capital goes to their investment committees and their investors, they need to address various sets of risks. But if you can de-risk those through policy, then the expected return will go down.
No, Andreas, I completely understand that, Andreas, and that's exactly why I'm saying that 20 to 25% of that $100 billion that MDB capital has to be there as first loss guarantees, as return top-ups, as hedging assistance, etc., etc. We have to exactly create those blended capital instruments that bring down the risk for private investors. Otherwise, that capital is not going to come in. Those are the instruments that need to be put together, and that's the heavy lifting we have to do. But as I said, it has to start with a commitment, a political commitment at the highest possible level, right? Where you sign that grand bargain, where you say we are part of a global climate alliance. And in that global climate alliance, $100 billion a year is going to flow from India, from sovereign wealth funds. But they are going to be supported in this fashion. They're going to get quote unquote guaranteed returns. They're going to be able to hedge the currency efficiently. Right now, we know that there's no long-term hedging of the Indian rupee. It's just not possible to do that. You've got to keep rolling currency futures to be able to do that. So can we create a 20-year currency hedge, for example, underwritten by the JCB? So those are the kinds of policy instruments. Those are the kinds of innovations that are actually required to be able to unlock these capital flows. And all of that will happen if the political leadership at the highest level signs the deal. Without the deal, none of this is going to flow down. Let me be crystal clear. And I think part of the reason why none of this has happened so far is because that deal has not been cut at the highest level. You've got to cut the deal at the highest level. Everything else flows from that.
Jayant, I'm conscious of your time, sir. Can you
Yes.
take a couple more questions, sir?
Just one final question, and then unfortunately I will have to sign off.
Okay, Faisal, I can see your hand being raised. Go ahead, Faisal.
No, Arvind, I've unmuted it. I appreciate you're taking my question, and I think you're also well qualified to address some of this, given your background at an MDB, addressing these topics in your earlier guides.
Well, I'll make a quick answer. The MDBs are really excited about this area, and they are champions of net zero. They will do whatever they can. At the end of the day, they have limited capital, and their masters, who are these basically the G8 and the G10s, they're championing all these causes that both Mr. Khemka mentioned and Jayantji mentioned. So that's what I'd say, Faisal.
So Arvind, this is Abhijit. If I can ask a question to Mr. Jayant Sinha, and it's also to introduce myself, that'd be awesome. I won't take more than a minute.
So go ahead, Abhijit.
Thank you. Mr. Jayant, my name is Abhijit. I'm a technology entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. And over the years, I've worked on air pollution and emissions problem. And I'm creating a fund to finance hard-to-abate industries in India. And we are pretty far along in the process. We're going to launch this fund exactly in the paradigm that you mentioned. And my philosophy so far has been that government will do things at the pace they will do, but we also have to take the responsibility to mobilize the industry, and that's this fund is about. It will have 3 tranches, from donor tranche to concessional funders to industry and institutional funders. And my thought process so far has been that I've been working with the industry directly, and SRTMI, which is the Steel Research and Technology Mission of India. And I was wondering if your organization would be willing to at least take a look at it, what we are doing, and probably guide us in this mission.
Well, Abhijit, I don't have an organization. I'm just a lonely member of parliament. So I don't really have any organization. I just gave you my email ID. If you have something where you would like to be introduced to somebody in government, because I'm a legislator, I'm not a member of the government. But if you have something that you'd like to send and you would like to speak to somebody in government, secretary, Ministry of Steel, or anybody else, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, whomever you would like to speak to, I'd be happy to facilitate an introduction for you. But you'd have to send me, sort of what you would like to discuss with them and so on, so
yes.
I can forward it.
Yes, and first I would like to discuss, ask for some of your time with the email, so I can actually introduce you to the idea, and then we can discuss who we can talk to. That'd be awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
Then we should give last word to lady. I think Madhu. I think it's the only one who left behind, not asking.
Yeah.
So Madhu, you have 1 minute to just.
Good evening. So I'm Madhu Lunawat, founder of Anchormath Group, and recently ventured into fund management. So my question is, I have seen we mindlessly follow what is going on, some invention in the West or what West is following, without realizing what will happen after, the end of life. For example, the solar panel filling up the landmines in California, right? I read an article, or how lithium mining exploitation is happening. So Uday, I would like to seek your views, because you have done deep work in this segment.
Look, I think that like any industry, very often it begins in the middle of the supply chain, and then it goes upstream and downstream to encompass the entire supply chain. We need to think about all aspects of this in terms of emissions, but also other costs. So I completely agree with you. Obviously, there's some high priorities for India right now in terms of power, transportation, building, and that leads to some very obvious first order pathways. But some people are going to do this with much more integrity than others. And the most important is that everyone has thought through these pathways. But there are lots and lots of resources today. So for us as a group, for example, I'm now putting my business hat on. We've invested all the way from the mining sector all the way down to the recycling, thinking through that value chain for example, in the EV sector. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. I have nothing more to add than to say this is a mission that needs to be comprehensive.
Thank you.
My hand
Thank
also.
you.
My name is Yes, and I don't know whether you can hear me. It's too late to ask many questions, but I would like to congratulate you all for this wonderful, wonderful mission.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to extend the best wishes from Switzerland, where Uday is sitting. My association, 2001 Smart Cities, has been working for 10 years in India, and I have never, ever heard anything as concise as what we've heard today. So if anybody wants to work in sustainable development with us from Switzerland, we would be very happy. And I have a lot of hope now after I've heard what you've said. Thank you all so much.
So thanks everybody. I think Jayant had to drop out. Obviously, he gave extended time to us and really grateful to him. And Uday, so nice of you to spend so much time. I know you all have spared valuable time from vacation, from other work, and I just want to close this here and over to you, Arvind, if there is something.
I think this has been fantastic. Thanks so much, Uday, for your excellent commentary and insightful views. Jayant ji I think he's just stepped out, and thank you, Nishith Bhai, for conceiving this whole event today. Thank you, and we hope that all of you will remain in touch with Nishith Desai Associates.
I would just say my own personal
the
thanks
ideas
to Nishith Bhai, and also Nishith Bhai, you've been the father of so many things in your career. So we hope you'll be the father really of moving India now in the green direction. Thank you for making this great first start. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. I think let's take next steps now and to make things reality rather than just leaving it as good talk. But thanks a lot.
All the very best.
Again, everybody, welcome. Thank you. See you on next occasion and over what in time. Thank you.